This is The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. It's a balanced, objective, unbiased and disruptive conversation on government and politics. We shine more light on what has not worked and what would make it work. And now, to the finest, personable and engaging host extraordinaire, Omobola Stephen.
Welcome
Tune
your
in.
host.
Good to have you on the podcast, The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. On The Backstory with Omobola Stephen, our mission and our focus is to shine more light on what has not worked and what will make it work. We have experts and professionals who are adept in the topics of government and politics and other subtopics like the society and culture, the environment, the economy, and also science and technology. We emphasize the need for us to begin to focus on transformative, disruptive, yet constructive mindship conversations at such time as these, because indeed the change that you and I are clamoring for in the world can only happen where we are intentional about embracing and expecting the changes, even as we make effort to embrace these changes as they come along. This is the mission and the focus of the Backstory with Omobola Stephen. Thank you, Azzedine Downes, for joining me on the show. Good to have you. Azzedine Downes is the president and CEO of IFAW, which is the International Fund for Animal Welfare. They work in rescue and conservation around the world. Good to have you once again, Azzedine Downes.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure and an honor to have you share the podcast with me as we explore on the important topic, especially focus on the biodiversity and how we can begin to effect the changes that we need in this environment. We want to talk about the biodiversity protection as a whole. So what do you think are some of the biodiversity efforts that we need to begin to improve upon? Do you see the government doing the right thing or doing enough in this regard?
I think the large issue is really how people view biodiversity and how they view nature. And one of the fundamental challenges that we have and that governments are involved in is the economy of saving the planet and the economy of saving biodiversity. And what we are up against is a philosophy that states that nature must pay for itself, and that if there's no economic value to either governments or to individuals, then it's not worth saving. And I think that that's a very short-sighted way of viewing the planet. And so when you talk about climate change, the focus is really on what has been lost. There was discussions at the last conference of the parties for the payment of loss and damage. So you talk about how much nature has been lost and how much nature has been damaged, but there's very little discussion of putting funding into preventing the loss of nature before it happens. And so I think we need to switch the conversation for governments away from focusing on what has already been lost to what needs to be saved.
All right, now I'd like us to look at the international cooperation, which is also very vital for biodiversity. Tell me about your brand. You work in rescue and conservation around the world. I'd like to know much more about your brand and what you guys have been up to lately as regards your project, and also in terms of international cooperation, which is vital for biodiversity.
Yeah. So our brand is animals and people thriving together in the place that we call home. And as CEO, the reason I changed the brand to focus on the people that live with wildlife is because I think that conservation was seen as a particular science that focused on the size of populations, how many elephants there are, or how many rhinos there are, or how many whales there are. But there was very little focus on what people can do to help save the biodiversity and save the planet. And so the focus away from the size of a population of animals to ensuring that there's investment in the people that live with wildlife is critically important. And the reason that it's a challenge to many people historically in conservation was because of the focus on national parks and protected places. Animals were inside the park and people were outside the park. And there was this philosophy that the two should not mix. But our philosophy is really based on the concept that we call room to roam. And that ultimately, if there is investment in education and health services and small business development for the people that live with wildlife, that ultimately they will have a healthier environment. And when they have a healthier environment, people prosper. And so it's an odd thing. It's an odd thing for an animal welfare organization to talk about those things. But I'm a firm believer in it. If we do not invest in the people that live with wildlife, we're not going to save wildlife.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is where conservation finance comes in. So how can we begin to invest in people and also in our planet?
Yeah, so I think that there's still very little coordination and cooperation between government agencies and even international treaties. If you talk about climate change and you talk about biodiversity, oftentimes the people, the experts that governments send to these international conferences are not the same people. So the people that go to the biodiversity conference are not the people that go to the climate change conference. And so what we have found is that in some instances, those experts are not even aware that their governments have already signed agreements for biodiversity. And so when we first began to speak with experts in the climate change arena, what we found was resistance, saying, well, you know, what are you doing here? What does wildlife have to do with climate change? And our argument is that when climate change happens, animals and people are going to migrate. And when they migrate in the same space, there's often violence. And I don't think that governments are really serious yet about the civil unrest that will happen because of climate change migration. And so we use the topic of wildlife migration to open discussions about what is it that governments are doing to invest in the communities in a real way to anticipate the challenges for resources. So there's water, um, there's food insecurity, civil unrest that takes place because of mass movements of people and wildlife living in the same space. So it's a complicated topic, but I don't think that there's enough cooperation. And I know this because when I speak to people who are investing and who have control of funds, whether it's agriculture or education or health, they always ask me, well, what does it have to do with your work? They're surprised that I'm talking about these things.
But really, talking about wars, pestilence that happen in the world, doesn't it have a major impact on wildlife? And how can we begin to close the gap?
You know, when you look at issues like drought, um, there's a resource that is most critical. So that's water. And you see that people who are reliant on rainfall for agriculture, they're in direct conflict with a lot of wildlife. So when water is plentiful and rain is plentiful, and it's not the same thing. It's interesting in one of our projects in Kenya, in Amboseli National Park, where there's a lot of water coming off of Kilimanjaro into the swamp. There's plenty of water for the elephants and for other wildlife, but there's no rain. And so that means that there's no foraging, there's no grasslands for the elephants to eat. But that also means that people who are relying on the water are in trouble. And so there's immediately a conflict. There's immediately a conflict of a food source and food insecurity. And it really relates to drought. It relates to land use, and in some countries, they have put in good land use plans to share land for agriculture and or foraging for cattle or wildlife. But in other countries where we work, they're just starting to have those land use plans. There's also issues of who owns the land. There's different concepts of land ownership and whether land can be owned by people or managed by traditional chiefs and then by governments. And so I think that there are a lot of things changing in terms of the movement of people into places where wildlife lives. Oftentimes we hear about there's too many elephants or there's too much wildlife. But in most cases, it's because people have moved into areas where there already was wildlife. It's very rare that you see wildlife moving into places that they never have been. I mean, they follow historical paths, and so we talk about corridors from one protected place to another, and this is where it becomes critically important that we engage with communities and the people that have moved into those spaces because they're looking for a better life for themselves and their children, and that's why we talk about animals and people thriving together. Um, is the government really planning for massive changes because of climate change? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they're focused on um, data that is hard for most people to understand. 1.5 degrees Celsius. What does it really mean for you if you're trying to send your kids to school and pay school fees and things like that? So it's not a coordinated effort, I would say.
All right, so I'd like us to look at the key aspects of the biodiversity global challenge, especially as related to accelerated extinction rates and also the threats to ecosystem services. What's your own thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at what has been lost, there's probably close to 1 million species that have been lost or are in danger of being lost. And this is where I get to this point of the focus is that nature must pay for itself, that it has no value unless it's translated into an economic benefit. The problem with that is that we are just managing the demise of the planet, and we're trying to slow down the loss of biodiversity. The issue that relates to the projects that we have is trying to move away from this philosophy that wildlife and biodiversity must be contained in one specific place, which could be a national park or it could be a reserve, as opposed to thinking holistically of where is it that people live, what is it that they need. Oftentimes they need the same things that wildlife needs. They need food, they need water. Um, and the issue of breaking away from what I see as a failure. Traditional conservation has failed in the sense that it's easier to just focus on a contained space. But then really, what is it that you have? You don't have the wildlife and the biodiversity that has in fact created the planet that we live in. And without it, this notion that we don't need it is just false. It's false. But it's driven by economics. And so the real problems of saving biodiversity, I don't think is really we don't know what to do. We do know what to do. But we won't do it because we can't make money from it. That's the real problem.
Technology also play a critical role in our world today, and so it is in modern conservation. Can we look at the challenges and consideration, especially regarding animal welfare and potential impact on ecosystem?
Yeah. So technology is interesting because I think oftentimes people think, oh, here's the solution. We're going to use technology, but technology can really help us in terms of whether it's drones or GPS or satellite imagery that shows us how wildlife moves and what are the hotspots. The other part of technology that is actually harmful to biodiversity is the issue of wildlife trade and illegal trade of wildlife and wildlife products is becoming more and more difficult to stop. And the reason for that is the internet and how people describe what they want to be able to sell. So on the internet, you can buy a tiger. You can buy almost anything. When we try to say, all right, how do we stop that? Criminals will always find a way to change the name of a product or change the imagery of a product. So what we're trying to do is use artificial intelligence to completely monitor and consistently monitor aspects of wildlife trade. So if you change the name of a particular product by using AI, it can very quickly identify this is an illegal product. The problem with trying to use technology is that the people on border security, for example, and customs officials and police, they're not experts in identifying what's legal and what is illegal. And I always use the example of we work in the Middle East, and there was a lot of trade of live animals and illegal wildlife products going through the Middle East and then going on to Asia. Is that the customs officials will tell me they have 45 minutes to transfer a shipment from one airplane to another. So how are they going to identify one, what's in the shipment, two, whether it's legal or illegal, and three, does it have anything to do with wildlife crime? They're very focused on other things like arms and drugs, but it's the same networks. And so what we try to do is to use technology to help those people who are not experts in identifying species to first just say, okay, this is an illegal product, and then they're able to stop. They're able to stop the shipment. So there's all sorts of ways that we can use technology, tracking products that move across international borders. Where it becomes very complicated is the international aspect of trade and the sharing of the data. And but academics oftentimes don't want to share their data because they may be working on a publication. Police don't want to necessarily share the data because they have their own cases that they're working on. So it becomes very, very complicated. But it gets back to your original question about how governments can do a better job of coordinating across international borders. And I think that there's ways that the technology can provide the data, but end of the day, it's about relationships and the willingness of people to share information so that we can more effectively disrupt criminal networks.
Now, really, how can we get the right personnel to fill in the gaps in the in our boundary or in our borders?
Yeah. There are good people out there, but I would say um, it's personal relationships. Honestly, there have been lots of efforts. You know, you have the Lusaka Task Force, for example, is set up in Zambia. It always takes funding, and so what we see is that governments make promises to fund these types of initiatives. But end of the day, there's so much pressure on national budgets to fund these things. I mean, one of the things that we see, you know, with the United States and the change of funding for conservation is that the argument is made, oh, there are so many more important things to do than fund conservation efforts. But the problem with that is that you're saying that biodiversity is not worth it. And it sounds crazy, but this is what I hear. Yeah, we'll save the planet, but only if it makes economic sense. But how are we going to survive? So there's pressure on national budgets, international budgets. Um, if you look at even with climate change, the loss and damage fund, I think promises were made in the billions of dollars. But when you look at how much money was actually made available, it's in the millions. So it's not enough. It's not enough. The expertise is out there. The expertise is out there, but the funding is not.
That poses a lot of challenge indeed, as the dean. And I think, I believe this is why we need to begin to have this kind of conversation in order to move forward indeed. As the dean, I thank you once again for sharing your thoughts. Do you have any exciting news you think the audience is going to benefit from, or you have a project in the pipeline you also think is going to add value to the audience? You can share if you have any.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, a message of hope is not to give up. There's so much bad news out there. But one of the things that we learned in the pandemic, and we're learning it again now, is that nature will bounce back much faster than anyone thought if we let it. And so use your voice to, you know, elected officials and other government officials that you may have contacts with, or use social media. Um, to spread this one message that we can save the planet if we decide to do it. It's possible.
Thank you for that. Your
All
social
right.
media handles are your website, so we can connect and learn more about you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Can we have it if you have those?
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the website is ifaw.org. It's ifaw.org. And there's lots of information there. There's lots of information about our projects around the world. And I hope you can support the work that we do, because supporting us is supporting you.
Absolutely, good to know. Thank you
All
once
right.
again, Azzedine Downes, for sharing your thoughts on today's show. Very, very important takeaways as regards how we can begin to effect positive changes and transformation in our ecosystem and also biodiversity. We really appreciate your time and also offering your valuable contribution to the topic of discussion. And now, as the Dean is the president and CEO of IFAW, which is the International Fund for Animal Welfare. They work in rescue and conservation around the world. Thank you once again. It's a pleasure and honor having you share the podcast mic and contributing to the podcast, The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. Wish you best of luck in all of the projects that you embark upon now and also in the near future as it is.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
It's been the Backstory with Omobola Stephen. If you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the podcast, we focus on government and politics topics with other subtopics like science and technology, the society and culture, the environment, and also the economy. You can do so on any podcast distribution platforms you bump into online or course promotion platforms online, and you have a great time. We will sincerely appreciate if you give us a 5-star review, a feedback, positive feedback about the podcast when you come across it online. We will sincerely appreciate. Till I come your way, I need you always to stay safe. I talk to you soon. Thank you once again, Azzedine. We had a great time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.